Hello, I would like to talk about the zealot meta. Now, there's something you need to understand right out away. There is a lot of contested ideas around what is actually the best with this class. There's a few setups that all effectively achieve the same purpose. So, I'm going to talk first about the setup that I personally like, and then we'll talk about the other setups and what makes them tick. Because honestly, it doesn't really matter which one you go with, they're all just as good. And if you just pick one and stick with it, it will perform fine. But you do need to understand the core mechanics of why they work the way they do. So, the general outline, though, for Zealot is Dueling Sword, Bolter, Toughness, Stamina, Toughness, with this talent tree outline. There are obviously a lot of things that you can change. So let's talk about that. The one that I think the most people would raise an eyebrow at is the dueling sword and going this way. Most people for meta builds with a zealot will go stalwart. But personally, I don't find that too valuable. The toughness damage reduction is huge, and there's a big push, people saying that Fury Rising doesn't matter and is a wasted stat. But honestly, if you're in a clutch situation and you have to deal with a boss that's constantly forcing you backwards, or a sniper or gunners or whatever, I have found in my recordings, just to try and monitor the uptime of Blazing Piety, going stalwart consistently provides noticeably less uptime, in the ballpark of 20% or so, compared to Fury Rising. And if you do go Fury Rising, Righteous Warrior allows for a very interesting setup. Righteous Warrior allows you to drop riposte from the dueling sword. Some people will take the left side anyways and not take riposte, but that's when you start dealing with like 50% crit chance relatively consistently, and that is when it becomes a noticeable DPS loss. So, the general theory here, whatever camp you subscribe to, this is the theory. You can always take riposte as a blessing and go this way and save yourself a skill point. Or you can go this way, not take riposte as a blessing, and take melee critical hit chance as a perk. Those are the two general schools of thought. The pros and cons of each are this. If you go the left path where you take where you take riposte, that frees up a perk and that frees up a skill point. So let's assume you're going the left path with Stalwart. Then you would use any combination of Carapace, Flak, or Unyielding for perks, and for blessings, you would always take Riposte. Then you would either take Thrust, is the most popular, Uncanny would be the next most popular, and Precog is the least popular. But any combination of those things are going to do you good. For the right side path, you would not take riposte, and for blessings, you would use any combination of precog, uncanny, and thrust. And for perks, you have to use melee critical hit chance. Then you would use any combination of carapace, flak, and unyielding. By the way, when I say you have to use critical hit chance there, I would just like to clarify that it's not a need to kind of thing. It's more of a, this is what theoretically gives the most optimal DPS across the most targets in the most situations. You could still totally go like flak, but then you're losing 10% critical chance in total compared to the left side path. So just keep that in mind. For the bolter, any perk combination of flak, carapace, unyielding is going to do you well. For blessings, you can either go pinning fire and puncture or pinning fire and cavalcade. There is that one blessing that applies brittleness on shot, but that has kind of been power crept out of the meta, if we're being honest. Because puncture just gives you actual breakpoints versus a lot of targets, and cavalcade just gives you more damage versus bosses. And since you're already using the dueling sword on a zealot, you have charge and duelist, there's really no reason to be using the bolter for crushers virtually ever. It's very inefficient without that particular blessing. As you can see, even with mag dumping with Cavalcade, you're still looking at over half your magazine just to. Or I'm sorry. You're looking at half your magazine just to kill a single Crusher. Granted, I don't have Carapace on, but that's because I'm pretty convinced the Bolter shouldn't be used to dump on Crushers. It should be used to kill large packs of Armored Ragers and Maulers and kill gunners, and it should be used mostly, I feel, for boss damage. That's where it absolutely excels. Okay, now let's talk curios next, actually. So some people will do toughness, 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 or toughness, max stam, toughness. Those are pretty much the only two setups that I ever really see as like the firm meta. These are the best. And the reason for that is honestly pretty simple. Since you get charge so often, and charge gives you so much toughness, and assuming you're going stalwart, you get this 25% toughness damage reduction on top of this toughness damage reduction, and then you get this, which is normal damage reduction, so this doesn't stack or have any kind of diminishing scaling. It just, these two would apply, and then this would apply, and it makes it so you can take like 5 hits before you even start losing noticeable health. So that kind of makes health not valuable, because why would you ever invest in health when you're already taking so little health damage through all your toughness reduction? Just having more toughness to benefit and synergize more with your ways to get more of it back and benefit from that damage reduction is always going to outpace it. Which, as a result, means the only perk that everyone can seemingly agree on is the 5% toughness is pretty good on Zealot. Some people say combat ability regen, it's not needed, purely because you are getting so much back in the first place. That's valid. I would argue that there really isn't that many good things to take in the first place, and even if it's just adding 5 dashes in total, it adds more, but let's just sake of the argument. It's still 5 whole dashes. That's 50% toughness, that's iframes, that's a stun, that's a super critical on like a boss or something. It consistently provides value and lets you spam it even harder. And you never know when you're going to need to spam it super hard. But if you don't want to take it, that's totally fine. For stamina regeneration, honestly, dude, this third slot is so open. I just take stamina regeneration because I personally value it. You could take revive speed. Hell, you can take a damage resistance here if you want. Zealot has a lot of good options. I would say stamina management tools are the best, but hey man, that one's just me. If you're like, I have dash, I never need stamina on this class, that's totally fine. I get that perspective. As for talents, there's also quite a lot you need to understand here. These two are just kind of free. I think you should take them because it's 45% boss damage, which is a shit ton. And then I just take this for Beast of Nurgles. But honestly, there's a lot of people who just move these around. They take Thy Raft Be Swift, they take Sustained Assault, they take Until Death. There is just so many things that you can do here that are honestly pretty valid and have their own reasoning behind it, that any combination of Until Death, Thy Raft Be Swift, Sustained Assault, or Purge the Unclean and Anoint in Blood, it's all going to be good. I think Until Death is not very good because I'm generally not dying, and the few times I am dying, I'm like, fuck, I really just need to play better here. So I personally see zero value in it, but it is a very impactful node when it procs, and it's just a 1-point investment, so I really can't fault someone for taking it. Okay, now let me talk about the other ways people build this. So, I want to talk about the key differences only. There is a lot of people that like Loner with Fortitude and Fellowship. So, here's what you need to understand. I'm not going to give... okay, I'll give my opinion. I think this setup is just worse because Benediction is more damage reduction for your toughness, which is always something you want, and it's an actual aura that helps your allies, and it's more point efficient. As you can see, you're able to get Faithful Frenzy in there, whereas you can't get that with the other setup. So, this is super inefficient, partly because of Duelist, frankly, but Duelist is so much damage that is active so consistently that a Zealot build without it, it kind of just can't be meta. Oh, it can be super good, but it's just so much free damage that you kind of always want to fit this in. So, what makes this setup inferior, in my opinion, is that you have to take Fortitude and Fellowship, and you have to take Toughness Regeneration Speed on the Curios. If you go the Loner route and you don't take this and those curio rolls, there is no benefit to taking this setup. So, the problem here is toughness regeneration speed. I have a whole video outlining the problems with it. Between the slot system interacting with it and the fact that it's just not... the big problem is that it's just not active as often as you'd like. This has more synergy with the Shroud Field variation of this, but we'll talk about that when we get there. This setup, it's fine, and frankly, I've been playing with it a good bit on streams. It's very consistent. You never have to worry about your toughness getting chipped in between fights, and you never have to worry about your teammates. But if you think that sounds atrocious and you'd much prefer the stronger, because this is unarguably a stronger overall build. You get more tools that give you more damage and defense, whereas this is just, you could argue it's more consistent. Okay, now let's talk about Shroud Field. So I believe this is the best Shroud Field setup, and the alternative would be the loner variation, but we'll talk about that when we get there. So, one big problem with Shroud Field and why I personally don't like it is honestly it's too strong. It is so easy to crutch on Shroud Field. Click the button, take like half the boss's health off, click the button, do the objective for free, click the button, don't have to worry about anything. It is so strong for you personally that I feel like I become a worse player when I play with it a lot. So I've just been not using it. But if you really like Shroud Field because of how good it is, then I believe this is the overall best setup for it. So the alternative to this would be the loner variation. Now, the problem with this is you don't have enough points to get Duelist and Fortitude and Fellowship. So you either need to not go this way and then do something like this, and then you just have a free point for like Thyraft Be Swift. This is, I would say, of all the builds I've shown you today, this is the worst one. No Duelist is a ton of damage loss. No Duelist with Shroud Field for that massive stacking synergy is a fuck ton of damage lost. And then you still have the problems of being locked into Fortitude and Fellowship. And it's just, geez, dude. So I think that the Duelist setup is better, but the problem with this is since you're going loner, you want Fortitude and Fellowship, and you want coherency or toughness regeneration speed on the Curios. Now, I will say that scales a bit better because Shroud Field immediately breaks the slot system. It effectively just turns your slots off, is what it does, like, mechanically. And in doing so, you immediately get coherency regeneration because of loner. So that setup is very consistent. But man, you give up a crap ton to do that. So that leads to the weakest overall build that has the most safety nets. So I would say this, honestly. If you want, you can do... That's a whole lot of clicking I don't want to do today. You can do something like this, where if you want the absolute most security baby mode, I'm never going to die no matter what, something like this. You would use something like this if you wanted to do a little, more and you just want to have a stronger overall build. This would be a more selfish and consistently defensive setup, whereas this would just be a better setup that is stronger in more situations. But, yeah, I'll link a Games Lantern in the description. Also, my Discord is still available for anyone to join if you want to do runs or just theorycraft build optimizations. Maybe you just want to join and tell me I'm an idiot who doesn't know anything and needs to change these builds. That's fine, too. I'd honestly like to hear it. Because Zealot is a class with a fuck ton of options. And honestly, every time I experiment with another person's Zealot setup, I say, this is really good and I see why you would do this. But, yeah, I hope you learned a lot and enjoy.